Today's assigned reading from the Hebrew Bible is Ezekiel chapter 17, verse 22 through 24. Thus says the Lord God, I myself will take a sprig from the lofty top of the cedar. I will set it out. I will break off a tender shoot from the topmost of its young twigs. I myself will transplant it on a high and lofty mountain. On the mountain height of Israel I will transplant it, and it will produce boughs and bear fruit and become a noble cedar. Under it every kind of bird will live. In the shade of its branches will nest winged creatures of every kind. All the trees of the field shall know that I am the Lord. I bring low the high tree. I make high the low tree. I dry up the green tree and make the dry tree flourish. I, the Lord, have spoken it. I will accomplish it. I usually spend my morning devotional time looking out on the large magnolia outside my bedroom window. You can all see it. You walk up church streets, that one beside the parsonage, probably 30 or 40 feet high, and there is a lot of life in the branches. Birds, squirrels, one day a whole third grade on a field trip. Some days the leaves are still, and other days they're in constant motion. And I like to compare the periods of stillness and motion to life in our congregation and consider where God's Spirit might be moving. Sometimes there's a rattle in the tree as a seed pod at the top breaks off and falls through the branches all the way to the ground. And I think about loss in our congregation and new life to come. When I make the tree a metaphor, I'm following a tradition at least as old as the Hebrew Bible, which finds all kinds of meaning in trees. A righteous person is a steadfast tree planted by water. All creation is infused with God's Spirit, causing the trees of the field to clap their hands. Trees are places of shelter and safety, places where every kind of bird can rest. But trees in the Bible are also reminders of threat and potential destruction. They sometimes represent foreign rulers or the worship of foreign gods whose altars stand on every high hill and under every green tree. Preparing for this sermon, I thought I'd study up on the trees of the Bible, but let me tell you, my Bible dictionary goes on for pages and pages on the subject, breaking this vast topic down by type of tree, fruit trees, costly timbers, forest trees, and each has multiple sub-entries under it. Even just one tree, the cedar of Lebanon, which is the focus of today's text, is a study all by itself. This towering tree, which can grow maybe 3 times as high as my magnolia, shows up again and again, and it bears meanings both positive, like strength and security and majesty, and negative, like ostentation and pride. In Ezekiel, sometimes a cedar is the king of Assyria, the most powerful nation of Ezekiel's time, always ready to destroy tiny Judah. Or it looks suspiciously like the king of Babylon, the nation that did destroy tiny Judah. Why does the singular image of a tree call up meanings both beautiful and terrible? Because in the poetry of the Old Testament, the beautiful and the terrible are all mixed up together. When poets need a symbol of beauty or strength or steadfastness, there it is, the fruit tree, the costly timber, the noble cedar. Today's text seems to dwell in the peaceful and the positive, full of tender shoots and fruit-bearing boughs. When God breaks off the top of a tall cedar and plants it in Israel's mountains, it will grow and prosper, to bear fruit and provide shelter for every kind of bird, the image that Jesus uses in today's parable from Mark. Now that is a beautiful image. As Catherine Darr observes in a commentary, Ezekiel does not illustrate the prophecy of Israel's restoration with scenes of Israel's vengeance against its foes, or of celebrations for battles fought and won, but with an image of the natural world in peace and safety. This is, she adds, a reminder that the metaphors we employ to talk about the future are not inconsequential. To the contrary, they play a role in shaping that future. We can pray that an image of beauty and safety and shelter pulls the nations toward a different future than an image of destruction. And yet, if you were a king, you might still have concerns about being compared to a tall tree. I bring low the high tree, says God in today's text, and indeed there are places in Ezekiel where tall trees do not fare well. In chapter 31, the tall cedar representing the mighty and proud nation of Assyria falls not just to the ground, but all the way through the ground and straight down to the pit of Sheol, from which no one returns. Every tall tree must understand that God has the power to reverse things. God has spoken, as God says in today's text, and God will accomplish it. As Mary sings in the Gospel of Luke, he has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. When we read Mary's song, we celebrate that reversal because we tend to place ourselves among the poor and oppressed, or at least we stoutly believe ourselves to be on their side. But we forget how terrifying reversal can be until it happens to us. Think how, in the small scale of our own lives, we struggle when our personal fortunes are reversed, whether by illness or by tragedy, by our own choices or by someone else's cruel advantage. It is terrifying when anything diminishes whatever power we have managed to accrue in order to manage our lives. When our personal tree falls in the forest, it may not make much of a noise, but it sure does hurt. Multiply that hurt to a fall on a national scale or an international scale, and millions of people suffer. In the history of this world, the lofty do not descend willingly, and they don't fall without taking down whole forests with them. The fall of power, so beautiful in Mary's song, is simultaneously terrible on the forest floor. In life, as in Old Testament poetry, the beauty and the terror are all mixed together. If the reversal of power is inevitable, as Ezekiel and a lot of other biblical prophets insist, and will bring what is good and right, as Mary's song promises, still that has never inspired power's willing surrender. We are feeling the struggle of powers acutely these days in our nation and all over the world. But the struggle of powers is hardly a modern invention. History teaches us that human societies have always acted this way, and sadly, we have not figured our way out of the struggle yet. But the reversal of power is a promise of the Old Testament, and it is a Christian principle. It is all through the Gospels. The last shall be first. The leader is the servant. The powerful shall be brought down from their thrones. But it is hard to let go of power. Any kind of power, whether the power of a king to order the world or simply the power of an individual to make choices about their own life. It is hard to descend from a lofty place to the ground. And yet, that is what Jesus did. The descent of Jesus from the high and lofty places to the earth brought something entirely new to reversal of power. There was no struggle, no grasping to stay in the high place, no crashing and tearing out other trees on the way down. As Paul wrote to the Philippians, though he existed in the form of God, he did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, assuming human likeness. An open-hearted emptying, a gentle glide to the ground. It sounds so beautiful. And yet to what terror did he descend, becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. The terror of vulnerability, the terror of mortality. It was all mixed in together, the beauty and the terror. That is what it is to be human. You may have heard of a musician and storyteller named Riley Bogus. About 20 years ago, Riley was living in Walkertown working as a welder when he was lifted up by a mighty hand, not the hand of God, but the hand of Hollywood. Dropped him in the middle of a movie named Cold Mountain, for which Riley built the banjos, taught the actors how to play the banjos, and recorded the musical tracks. And ever since then, Riley has been traveling the world, but he still lives in Walkertown. And a few weeks ago, I was privileged to hear him in performance. And what has not left my mind since that evening is the story he told about riding the pines. Riding the pines is what his parents and their friends did when they were children, and subsequently would never, ever have allowed their own children to do, even as they told their stories about it. To ride the pines. The children would venture into the woods, looking for tall trees with slender tops. And they would shimmy up the trees 10, 15 feet or more, then grasp those slender tops, and then they would jump outward and ride the arc of the pine as it bent all the way to the ground. As Riley said, my parents wouldn't even let me cross the street by myself, and here they were riding 15-foot pines to the ground. I cannot recommend riding the pines to anyone of any age, and yet I can't stop thinking about it. Every time I think of it, I can feel it. The wild and terrible and yet somehow gentle and tender descent. It feels to me like an image of Christ descending from the lofty place to the earth. Not dashed to the ground like a proud and brutal and defeated ruler, but descending in an arc, a branch bending gracefully yet quivering with unimaginable force. In that arc of descent is all the beauty and all the terror of Christ's coming to earth. The incarnation of Jesus changes forever the picture of what it means for the lofty to descend to the earth. A power not falling to the earth with a crash, taking lives down with it, but gliding downward in the beauty of faith and the terror of vulnerability. When we are threatened with a fall, from the lofty place to the lowly, from agency to lack of control, from what we consider our normal lives to something we no longer recognize, are we willing to surrender power, as Christ did? Isn't that the ultimate leap of faith? To believe that God will carry us not only on the way up, but more on the way down. One more word about today's text. I am assured by my Bible dictionary that cedars do not regenerate from cuttings. In human hands, only seeds can grow a cedar. But in the messianic vision of Ezekiel, God's new thing, breaking off the top of a cedar and planting it in the ground, offers a new image for God's reversal of power. Metaphors are not inconsequential, and they play a role in shaping the future. May our future be shaped by the image of the tall cedar or the tall pine, gently brought down to bring life in this place of beauty and terror, all mixed together. Amen.